Hello, everybody. How are you? Can you hear me okay? Yes? Scream? Is that what you want? Really? Certainly you don't want that. Don't spit. That's right. Well, I do. I probably would spit if I was screaming. So, it's good to see all of you. Glad you're awake. Hope you stay that way, obviously. If you remember the last time I spoke, that same image was up on the screen. And we're going to kind of continue with that same topic for this week anyway. We were looking at the first part of Matthew 8. We're talking about the authority of Jesus. We talked about Jesus' ability to heal the leper. We talked about his ability to heal a paralyzed man and then various diseases. And what Matthew is doing is he is showing through these different acts of Jesus that he has authority over various things. We talked about how Jesus had the authority even over nature, that he calmed a storm when all the disciples were worried about that. And so his authority stretches far and wide. Well, tonight we're going to continue with that to look at some other examples that Matthew gives us. And what we'll start with is Matthew 8, starting at verse 28. When he, talking about Jesus, arrived at the other side of the region of the Gadarenes. So he had gotten into a boat, and he is heading across the Sea of Galilee. Those two demon-possessed men coming from the tombs met him. They were so violent that no one could pass that way. What do you want with us, Son of God? They shouted. Have you come here to torture us before the appointed time? Some distance from them, a large herd of pigs was feeding. The demons begged Jesus, if you drive us out, send us into the herd of pigs. He said to them, go. And so they came out and went into the pigs, and the whole herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and died in the water. Those tending the pigs ran off, went into the town, reported all of this, and including what had happened to the demon-possessed men. And then the whole town came out to meet Jesus, and when they saw him, they pleaded with him to leave their region. Now, the Gadarenes is on a side of the Sea of Galilee in an area called the Decapolis, which is an area that has 10 cities, and the majority of the people that live there are Greeks. And so when you see a group of people that are herding some pigs, it's very likely that they were Greeks. Now, it may not be, but it was very likely that's who it was. Now, in this passage, have you ever read this passage before? And it's also included in Mark and in Luke. In Mark chapter 5 and in Luke chapter 8. Now, what you'll notice as you look at those two passages, there are some differences. There's a lot of similarities. It sounds like it's the same story. It looks like it's the same story, and yet Matthew's story is a little bit shorter in nature. It doesn't go into as great detail. And Matthew mentions there are two men. Mark and Luke mentions that there is one man. Now, this is going to be kind of like a Bible class. You know how I've been doing things, right? You guys prepared for that? All right. Why? Why does Matthew say two, and then Mark and Luke say one? Witnesses? What do you mean? Okay, so there are some commentators that say Matthew is really sticking to that idea of in the Jewish law that you need to have two witnesses. So he mentions that there are two men, while the other mentioned that there's just one. Okay, that's one possibility by some of the commentators.
Another possibility, one of them was A personality, the other was B personality. One of them did the speaking. Two men, but only one did the speaking.
Okay, so Howard's saying that.
Kind of a leader, kind of got stepped out front and said, well, what are you coming here for?
Okay.
So me and my buddy here is not talking.
Okay, so Howard's saying that in Matthew, he mentions that there are two people, but in Mark and Luke, they only refer to the guy who actually talks, right?
That's what I.
Okay, all right. Bob agrees,
Okay,
right? Okay,
we got it.
you got it. So now that they know what's going on, right, and that could be it. One of the things that sticks with me is very close to what you're saying is that Matthew's focus here in these two chapters is really on the authority of Jesus over these various things. And so as he focuses on this, he focuses on that authority specifically. Now, he doesn't discount that there are men in the story. It's not like that. He doesn't ignore the demons or anything like that. But his story is a little bit shorter, and he's focusing on Jesus' authority over the demons. Now, in Mark and Luke, they also focus on Jesus' authority as well, but their primary purpose seems to be more related to the one who actually changes. Like, it could be that there's only one that's speaking, that there's only one man that speaks. But in those stories, what also happens is that at the end, that man wants to follow Jesus. And Jesus says, no, you can't get in the boat with me. What you need to do is go back and tell your family and your friends what God has done for you. And it seems like their focus in those two Gospels is on that one man primarily and the change that takes place because of the impact that Jesus has had on him. Now, it's not that Matthew is ignoring that. It's just that's not really what he wants to focus on. And so they mention one man in those two stories because it sounds like there's one man that makes the change. Maybe the other guy doesn't. I don't know. Maybe it's that one man is the spokesperson. Maybe that's it. That's what makes sense to me. The reality is the Gospels don't tell us why. And so we have to speculate to some extent. And so what's happening here is, I think what Matthew is doing, he's really focusing on this idea that Jesus has power over the demons, and we can't lose sight of that. Now notice, let's go back. What do the demons say? What do you want with us, Son of God? So they know who Jesus is, right? Okay, they know that Jesus is the Son of God. Have you come here to torture us before the appointed time? They know that Jesus can hurt them. They know that he has power over them. In James chapter 2, verse 19, James says this. It says, you believe that there is one God? Well, good. Even the demons believe that and shudder. And I think in this situation, the demons are shuddering. I mean, they're shaking in their boots because they're afraid of Jesus. So that brings me to something. Sometimes I wonder if our fear of evil is greater than our trust in God. Like when we are afraid, do evil things scare you? Do they? Some people like to be scared, right? They like to go someplace where they're scared by things that seem to be evil. They like to go to haunted houses and those kind of things. When we were kids, we liked to do that stuff, right? Lita, I know that you probably like to do stuff like that, right? But when it really feels like there is evil present near us, do you think that fear that we have of that evil ever blocks out our trust in God, or maybe overshadows that trust in God? Does it make sense what I'm asking? Do you think there's truth in that statement? Okay. Well, what's the evil that causes you to fear? I mean, what's the evil that's around us that causes us to fret over things? What would that be? Huh? Okay, so people that shoot people, and there doesn't seem to be any reason behind it. They just are out killing people. Okay? What else? What? Abortion? So when you hear those stories about abortion, that is something, does that frighten you? Or does that make you sad? Makes you ill, okay? You think about that, okay? Yes?
I think sometimes it's the fear of the unknown, not necessarily something you see.
Okay.
But the unknown, and I think that has a strong pull on our faith in God.
Okay. So the fear of the unknown, especially if it seems like something that's harmful. can have an effect on our faith in God. I think you're right about that. That it's really easy to focus on the evil that's present and let that overshadow the fact and the truth that Jesus is the authority over even the evil that's present. I mean, in this story, what we're discovering is that Jesus has the authority over the demons. Now, it's not that the demons can't do things. I mean, they've done some things with these men, right? They've hurt them. They've scared the people in the countryside. They've scared the people in the city. And yet, Jesus has the power over the evil that may be present. And so, as his followers, it's important for us to remember that. Yes, sir.
They know that the judgment's coming. They've got that figured out.
They do know it.
If you come before time to do what you're going to do.
Uh-huh. So Howard's saying that these demons knew that the judgment was coming for them. And they were hoping it wasn't right now. Let me ask you this question. Do demons or evil, do those things influence us? And if so, how? Do demons or evil influence us? What?
It depends on your definition of a demon.
What? Yes.
Because I don't think we have the demons now that were present when Christ was on earth.
Okay.
Unless it's mental illness.
Right.
Unless serious mental illness.
Well, and that's interesting that you brought that. Sandy brought up the fact that it depends on what your definition of a demon is. And she doesn't feel that we have demons that take over people like at the time of Jesus, unless that's what mental illness is, you know. But I don't know. I mean, yeah, maybe not. I had a conversation with somebody the other day about that very thing. And so, and it depends on what you mean by demons, because sometimes, have you ever heard the phrase that I have demons that haunt me? And they're not really talking about a demon that's gotten inside of them. They're talking about things that they've done in their past or experienced in their past that haunt them and affect them. And sometimes as a result of those demons that they're talking about, they do things they wish they wouldn't do. Or they struggle with things they wish they didn't struggle with. You don't agree with what?
I don't think demons cause mental illness.
Okay? And they may not. I mean, and you may be very right about that.
People can have mental illness just by experiences in their lifetime.
Mm-hmm. So she's saying that sometimes there are certain circumstances that occur that cause us to have struggles with our emotions and mental illness, PTSD. You know, okay, right. So that comes because of trauma, right? Okay. So the thing is, we have such a limited understanding of the struggles with regard to mental illness. I mean, there's all kinds of treatment for all kinds of things, and there's studies that are done and work that's done, and sometimes there's success, and a lot of times there's not. And those are things we struggle to figure out. In this time, during the time of Jesus, it could be that that's how they looked at mental illness. Whatever it is, evil is present in the world today. And it affects us. I mean, think about this. When Jesus, in Matthew chapter 16, Peter had just said that Jesus is the Son of God, that he is the Messiah that's come. And then when Jesus begins to talk about how he's going to die and suffer, Peter says, no, you're not. That's not going to happen to you, Jesus. And what does Jesus say? What does Jesus say to Peter? Get behind me, Satan. In that statement, Jesus is signifying that evil is present, that it is affecting Peter's judgment. Now, it's not because Peter wants it to affect his judgment, but the evil is present in that situation. And the thing is that there is evil around, and it does affect us in some way. And we need to realize that. But even as we realize that, it's more important for us to focus on Jesus, the one who has the authority, than it is for us to focus on the evil itself. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Because if we lose sight of Jesus, the one who can help us with all that stuff, then we're in a boatload of trouble. So that I think is a really important point for us. Now, I don't know if that's exactly what Matthew was trying to get at here, but I do think that that's something that we can learn, that is really important for us to focus on the authority of Jesus. Now, look at what the people did. When they saw what Jesus did, these guys went into town, told them about it. They came out to meet Jesus, and they told him to leave. Why? Maybe because you killed all our pigs. We don't want somebody around here who's going to kill all our pigs. All right? Yes, but if you're a Greek, like if you're a Greek person, that doesn't matter. It's like, hey, this is my livelihood. So Jesus allowed this to happen. Okay? And it never explains any of this stuff. It just says this is what happened. Yeah. And in all three accounts, the city was upset with him, wanting to leave. So maybe that's what it is. Because they don't want him to ruin their livelihood. But think about it like this. They had these two guys who were creating havoc, and these were the guys they knew, right? This was the evil they knew. This was the power they knew, they were familiar with. And now there's another man that comes on the scene, and he's much more powerful than what the demons were doing. And it's like, I don't know if I want to deal with that. And does that sound similar to what the history of people have been like with God? What happened with the children of Israel when they heard the Ten Commandments out loud from God? Remember what they said to Moses? Huh?
We will obey.
Well, yeah, but what did they ask Moses to do? Because when God spoke the Ten Commandments and they heard his voice and they saw the mountain, what did they ask Moses to do?
You go up and talk to him and come down and tell us what he said.
Yeah, you go up and talk to him, and then you tell us what he said, because we don't want to hear it anymore. All right, we're afraid of this. We don't want him to speak to us. And the town is doing the same thing. Actually worse, they're not doing exactly the same thing. They're saying, hey, just leave. And so do we ever do that when Jesus makes us uncomfortable? Do we ever want Jesus to, hey, just don't bother me right now? I'm uncomfortable with what you want from me. Yeah.
If you think about just the Jewish people during the time of Christ, true, the Pharisees were afraid of Jesus because he was powerful and he did have authority, even though they didn't want to admit it. But I can't fathom that they really couldn't believe when he healed people, made the blind see, the lame walk. It's indisputable.
Right.
And yet, it's a fearful thing. I mean, now today, if you think about all the people who claim that they can heal people, we all are,
We're all skeptic?
I am very skeptical.
Yeah. Right. Sandy was talking about the Pharisees and how they would see the miracles of Jesus, but they still would deny them. They still didn't want to believe them. They still wanted to get rid of him. And that's true in some situations. But what about us? Are there situations or times in our life when Jesus is calling us to something and it's uncomfortable for us and therefore we don't want to have to deal with it? It's just easier to ignore? Or maybe hope that God kind of goes away so I don't have to deal with it? I think in each of these passages, as we look through what God is telling us, we have to look at ourselves. What part would we have played here? Who would we have been? And so it's important for us to be aware that sometimes God calls us to things and we may be uncomfortable with it, and as a result of that uncomfortableness, for whatever reason, it may be really easy for us to ignore. and in a sense, kind of send Jesus away. He goes on in Matthew 9. So Jesus stepped into a boat, crossed over, and came to his own town. Now, some men brought to him a paralytic lying on a mat. And when Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Take heart, son, your sins are forgiven." And at this, some of the teachers of the law said to themselves, "This fellow is blaspheming." Knowing their thoughts, Jesus said, "Why do you entertain evil thoughts in your hearts? Which is easier to say, 'Your sins are forgiven,' or to say, 'Get up and walk'?" Now, why do you think that they believed he was blaspheming?
What?
Why do you think that these people thought that Jesus was blaspheming?
Because he was saying he was God.
Yeah, he was saying he was God. And some guy can't say that, right?
Right.
You have no power to say that you're God. You don't have the authority to forgive people of their sins. Who do you think you are? So what does Jesus do?
Whatever's easier, get up and walk.
Yeah, so what is he saying by that? When he says, okay, so which is easier? What's he trying to accomplish with that statement?
To show that he's still in command. That he's in command of the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And that because they got up and walked, that they've been forgiven their sins also.
Right. So if he is, so you're saying that if he has the power to heal him of his paralysis, which is harder to prove because nobody's really healed anybody of paralysis before, then he should have the power to forgive him of their sins?
That he does.
That he does. Okay.
He does have the power because
Right.
that's what he led with.
Mm-hmm.
Your sins forgiven, get up and walk.
Right. And that, what?
And which is easier to say?
Right. Yeah. So which is easier to say? Yes, sir.
I think when I look at this, when these people are confronting Jesus, and they're concerned about this, and Jesus, but what is it easy? Is it easier for me to say your sins are forgiven, or get up and walk?
Mm-hmm.
Trying to look at the analogy of which is. If he had said your sins are forgiven, he could have put the command, the man could have done it.
Yeah. And there's no way to prove that his sins could be forgiven, right?
But the Pharisees would have thought that the man who could not walk, that there was sin in his life.
Oh, yeah.
May have caused the paralysis.
And that's a good point. Yeah, because a lot of times what they thought was if something bad happened to you, it was because of sin. Your parents or you, right. Yeah.
So, I guess it's just looking, trying to weigh which is easier.
Yeah.
This apple or this orange?
Right. And this is a unique thing in this story because we've already had a story of somebody who's paralyzed. But in this story, Jesus begins by saying your sins are forgiven. So he begins by talking about the fact that sin is also a part of the equation with all this stuff that's going on. Sometimes sin can paralyze us, can it? How can sin paralyze us? Fear. Fear of what? Okay, fear of the repercussions of sin, like the consequences maybe. Okay. How else might sin paralyze us? Well, just a minute, I'll come back to you. Okay, you stop to think because of the sin that might be involved rather than acting.
Well, I come from a flying background.
Okay.
This can go wrong when you do.
Right.
And therefore, if something really goes wrong, you don't sit there and have time to think, your first.
Right.
They call it bold.
Okay.
Do that. You don't have to go to the book. Something went wrong and you know immediately to do something.
Right. So you're talking about being in a situation where you're prepared so that you can respond appropriately without having to go back to the book to see what the rules are and all the steps are. Because by then it might be too late. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
When Saul becomes Paul, it can be a similar situation where Paul could have said, "Oh, no one's going to accept me. I can't go to these Christian gatherings now and speak to them because they'll know my background. They won't trust me."
Right. Right. So Bob is saying that when Saul was converted and his name was changed to Paul, he could have said, you know what, I am such a terrible sinner that there's not anything I can do for God. And therefore, I'm not going to go out and try to rescue people. I'm not going to try to go and save those that are lost, because nobody's going to listen to me anyway. Okay? That would be one way that sin might paralyze us, yes.
Along with what he said, I think we have to realize that Satan is always out to get us.
Okay?
And especially when we sin. Because then he tells us the lie, you can never be forgiven. You are too far gone.
Right. So, go ahead, Sandy. Okay, so Sandy's talking about how sometimes we buy into this lie that Satan may be feeding us, that we're so far gone that we can never be forgiven, and that will paralyze us and would actually cause us to go back into sin. So, because what's the use in trying? I mean, I'm never going to win, so I might as well just go ahead and go all out. Howard, did you have something else? I'm sorry. I forgot to come back to you. Okay. So there's a number of ways that sin might paralyze us. And so we can get stuck in this. And so we've got to be careful of that. Okay. One of the things, before we get into this, did I go backwards or am I lost? Okay. There I am. That's where I wanted to be. I was so confused. I was paralyzed. Okay.
Repent.
I will repent. So Jesus not only has the power to heal our sick and paralyzed life, but he also has the power to heal our sick and paralyzed souls. And I think that's one thing that we can get from this story. That it's not just about the physical stuff, it's also about the spiritual stuff. Yeah. So he's the one with the authority, even beyond the physical, even into the spiritual. There's one more that we want to look at. Chapter 9, verses 18 through 26. While he was saying, now this is farther on in that chapter, so this is while he was saying this, a ruler came and knelt before him and said, "My daughter has just died, but come and put your hand on her and she will live." Now Jesus got up and went with him, and so did his disciples. Just then, a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak. She said to herself, "If only I touch his cloak, I will be healed." Jesus turned and saw her. "Take heart, daughter," he said. "Your faith has healed you." And the woman was healed from that moment. And when Jesus entered the ruler's house and saw the flute players and the noisy crowd, he said, "Go away, the girl is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. And after the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took the girl by the hand, and she got up, and news of this spread throughout all the region. Now, these two stories were also in Mark and in Luke as well, in the same Mark 5 and Luke 8. And you'll notice that there are some differences in those as well. Those are a little bit more detailed again than this one. But again, I think the focus for Matthew is the authority of Jesus over various things. And so that's his point. What we find out, let's say like in Mark 5, we find out that this woman had gone to a number of different doctors through the years. She had suffered a lot as a result of that. Nobody was able to help her. And she has gotten to, this is her last hope. It's her last hope. So when Jesus says, "Take heart, daughter, your faith has healed you," what's he really saying to her at that point? Take heart, daughter, your faith has healed you. What's he saying? What's his point?
She obviously had a lot of faith, because she thought if she just sneaked up and just touched the hem of his garment, that he would heal her.
Right.
How many of us would have done something like
Right. She took a risk. I mean, you're talking about the fact that she must have had a lot of faith because she snuck up there and touched his garment. And in the other stories, what we discover is that Jesus stopped and said, "Wait, who just touched me?" Matthew doesn't talk about that, but who touched me? And his disciples are like, "Well, wait, everybody's around here. What do you mean?" And so Jesus focuses in on this lady, and she had all these people who treated her. And she's taking a risk because if she goes up there, she doesn't know whether he's going to say, I don't have time for you. She doesn't know whether he's going to say, this isn't worth my time, or whether you're not worth it, or whether he might do something that may harm her too. She doesn't know those things. What she does know is that this is her last hope. And she knows that he's helped others. And so she gets up as close as she can in this big crowd just to touch his garment so that maybe she can be healed as well. And it happens. And so when Jesus is saying, Jesus is the one who heals her, right? It's his power that heals her. He's the one with the authority, and yet it's her faith that brings her to him. And so that faith is an extremely important part of the equation. And so we ask ourselves, where's our faith? Where's our trust? Do we depend upon Jesus the way that this woman was depending upon him? And when you go on in the story, the ruler whose daughter had died, Jesus was their last hope too. So do we look at Jesus as being our last hope? The one that we truly depend upon? At what point do we fully depend upon Jesus? And you think about it in your life. When is it that you have fully depended upon Jesus? Ever? Do you ever feel like you fully depended upon him? We should be. But have there ever been moments in your life when you felt like you really just completely depended upon Jesus? And when? Yes.
I think when you accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior and are baptized,
Mm-hmm.
that would be it. When you fully are trusting.
Okay, so Bruce is saying that when we accept Jesus and commit our lives to him and are baptized into Christ, that's a moment when we fully depend upon him. And I would agree with that. The way I kind of describe it to people is that if you've ever done a trust fall before, when you're talking about the commitment, you're standing on this platform, and you've got people that are going to hold you. Now, you know that they're there, but you don't know for sure where they're going to catch you because you haven't done it before. And what you have to do is keep your body really straight, fall all the way back. Now, when you're standing at the platform, it doesn't mean that you have the faith yet. But once you've gotten so far that you can't go back, that's when you are fully depending upon the people to catch you. And that's what commitment is. Now, what people do a lot of times is they roll up in a little ball because they want to protect themselves, and they go right through the arms of the people, and then it's very painful. But I would guess that for most of us, when we have found ourselves fully depending upon Jesus, it has been maybe at some of the most difficult times in our lives. And so and in those moments, we hate those moments, but those are moments that Jesus is teaching us some valuable lessons. And that was true for this ruler, and that was true for this lady who had had this issue of blood, who had never gotten any help from anyone. But those are hard times. And so Jesus never said it would be easy. But he did say he would be with us, that he would help us. And that's what these stories show too, that he helps these people in need. The God who reaches out to touch our uncleanness, to make us clean, the one who is in the boat with us through the storms of life, the one who can cast aside the demons that haunt us, the one who can free us from the paralysis that sin can cause in our lives is also the one who gives us hope when all hope seems to be lost. He has power over sickness and death and nature and demons. Jesus is the Son of God, the one with all the authority. And it's extremely important for us to remember that. But it's also important for us to remember that all these people that he healed, all these people that he cast demons out of, even the people that he raised from the dead, all ended up dying eventually. And the reason that's important is because we know that even when that happens, and that's going to happen to us, that there's more to the story. That God still gives us hope even after our lives here. That once everything is said and done, that those who are in Christ are raised to walk as new creations. That even we who are left that are still alive when Jesus comes, that we can be with God in paradise, that we can be with him and live with him forever. And then we don't have to worry about death, and we don't have to worry about sickness or demons or any of those other things. And as Christians, that's the story that we have to share with people, to help them to know that Jesus is the one true authority over everything. No matter how bad life gets, he's still in charge. And when everything's said and done, it's going to be okay. So I don't know where you're at. I don't know what kind of things you've struggled with. I don't know if you're struggling with anything tonight or not. But I just want to encourage you to remember that Jesus is the one who's in charge, and he's got control of it. And if you are struggling, if you want to pray with us, if you want some encouragement, that's what we're here for, is to encourage one another. And if that's what you need, let us know as we stand and sing.